as you said, there's going to be a bit of a surprise for you all. I know it's getting close to lunch, towards hungry times, so we'll make sure it's worth the wait. Yeah, I'm Richard. I work at Xerox PARC, and I'm here to talk about Zupass. But before I get into Zupass, I actually want to first talk about Ethereum. We are at an Ethereum conference, and one theme that we've seen popping up over the past, I think, few years, especially in few months, even more specifically, is how do we get to things that people can use, right? Not just interesting ideas in theory, but as Vitalik says in this blog post, this is a decade where we actually have to build things that are useful. And I think there's been a lot of really exciting directions in the stable coins, the prediction markets, DeFi in general, right? I think that kind of world has been really exciting to see things come to fruition. But there's this broader world of the promise of Ethereum beyond just more ways to use money, more ways to increase financial access. There's this vision of computing being a different sort of paradigm because of decentralized technology, because of cryptography. So I think that's where I want to focus on, and I want to approach specifically this problem from the usefulness lens. And I think one interesting thing about Devcon and Ethereum conferences is that conferences can serve oftentimes as ground zero for new technology breakthroughs. There are early glimpses of what's possible. You have a bunch of sort of really bought-in, excited people, caring a lot about coins or frog hats, right? And it's a chance to sort of show what you can really do in a short amount of time. And two examples that people might know of are, one is this 1968, this guy, unknown professor from Cornell, Doug Engelbart, introduced modern computing, the personal computer, the mouse, the spreadsheets. It was all hard-coded. There was no actual product, but it was a sort of vision for researchers at Xerox PARC and for Bell Labs and these folks to sort of actually innovate and build the thing that we now know as probably the most important industry of the past 50 years. The one on the right is Twitter at South by Southwest in 2007. Just another example of how we've seen early glimpses of social media, and it's changed our lives for better and for worse. So I want to start with this prompt, which is, what did going to an Ethereum conference feel like 5 to 10 years ago? And I actually wasn't part of the Ethereum ecosystem 5 to 10 years ago, so I'm just kind of guessing, but let's play along. And let's target it from the technology perspective of the conference. So you're at a conference, there's a few things, features or products that are important, right? There's ticketing, you need to be able to get in. There's communications, I want to meet people. I want to sort of expand my network. I want to sort of hear what's going on. And I want to go to talks, right? And you can roughly map this out in a data way with, you have all these sorts of objects. For example, you have your tickets in this ticketing server. You have communications and messages in another. You have some other stuff going with talks. It's pretty standard sort of thing you do for any kind of web application. And one thing I want to explore, this is 5, 10 years ago. What does it feel like in 2023? I chose last year because this year's a little different. But it's basically the same picture. The one thing that's changed is, now we can buy tickets with Ethereum, right? And that's pretty amazing and powerful how that happened. But it feels like we could be doing a lot better, right? Not because we're trying to make the best conferences, but because conferences are where folks from the community should sort of see what's going on at the bleeding edge. Yeah, so basically nothing has changed much. And what could it look like in the future, right? What could the reality of being part of the Ethereum community look like in the future? This is a bit more complicated of a diagram, but essentially, all those pieces of data, right, that are being held in servers, why aren't they being held by me, right? And not just for privacy reasons, but also for the fact that I can port them across different applications. Applications themselves could live as smart contracts, right? Be publicly auditable, be composable, all that good stuff. And I think here's my take, which is if we can't do this, if we can't actually just run the biggest and most important event on Ethereum in a few years, something's really wrong, right? And I think that's sort of a red flag almost. And And here's one exercise, which is like, what would it actually take to run Ethereum conferences on Ethereum, right? First off, what are the benefits? I think most people here are familiar. I won't sort of spend too much time, but you have all these sorts of like data ownership, composability, permissionlessness, everything's verifiable, right? And this is powerful because you can have these sort of new behaviors that emerge that are only possible when you have very strong guarantees. Now, what's holding us back, right? Yeah, basically all state is public. That really sucks. You can't really have any sort of secrecy or privacy that you want sort of just because you want to build. Organizers don't want, or I don't want somebody else knowing my information, right? It's not sort of a ideological thing, it's a very practical thing. Most of the world's data is still on Web 2. It's not very portable yet. Building in Solidity is still really, really hard, right? Computation's expensive and high latency. I mean, rollups make this better. The resources in development have made the third point better, but I think it's still pretty tough to build an actual like high load application on Ethereum. Yeah, so I think at this point it's still too high a friction to go all in, but we don't have to go all in, right? I think there's this tendency to be like, oh, it has to be fully decentralized or private, or it has to be nothing. But I think there's ways to sort of like 80-20 this, right? And the question is like, how do we get to sort of 80% of the benefits? There's a lot of clicks. With only 20% of the cost of using this tech, right? And one thing that I'll note is that things like Zupass, among other really great applications in the past few years, have made this more possible, right? And through different types of, through certain data formats, but also through encouraging a certain type of application. So put simply, data is not stored directly in Ethereum. However, it's easily portable to Ethereum because it's cryptographic, right? And not only is it portable to Ethereum, but it's portable to basically anything, because you just need to be a person or a computer that speaks math, right? It's kind of the universal language. And just to kind of go through some vocabulary, my colleagues will probably inundate you guys with these phrases more later on, but a pod is essentially, you can think of it as a JSON that has some proof attached to it. It's a statement about the world. Zaps are these things we're calling, which are applications that operate over pods, and they connect to your Zupass, which is a store for pods, and it stores and also manipulates, and these are all stored locally. You might hear this thing called a GPC. It's basically, it stands for General Purpose Circuit. Essentially, it's a kind of a ZK FPGA where you can sort of configure a circuit or a proof through JSON rather than having to write CIRCOM or learn functional programming. And you can make proofs that are really, really efficient, like 2 to 3 seconds on a mobile phone. Okay, so some examples. Pods, so your Devcon ticket, which I'm sure all of you used, maybe struggled with a bit, but and other sort of events in the Zuzalu ecosystem, which is where Zupass got its name from. For example, Edge City, Zuconnect, which was before Devconnect last year, your frogs, and other pods from applications like questions and answers, like Meerkat is one example, which will be used at the end of this talk. That QR code to the right there. In terms of zaps, we have, there's just a lot of stuff on this page, but briefly, right, there's things that help with communication, like the Telegram. There's things that are just fun games in their own right, like ProgCrypto, and actually have their own extensions, right, like the necklaces, these guys, and apparently there's a game where you can juice a frog and put it on chain. Just hearing all kinds of stuff now. And then also faucets, right? So I think the Mekong faucet came out, and that's using Devcon gating. So all kinds of different things are highly, all kinds of really complicated logic is highly flexible because you're essentially just writing a TypeScript app that checks some cryptography rather than having to write a whole smart contract. And given these sort of new technologies and capabilities, right? What does feeling Devcon go like? What does going to Devcon feel like? It feels a lot like, well, I have some application that stores my own data, it's issued by trusted services like Devcon, but I can now use that across a whole bunch of different zaps. I can get, and not just tickets, right? I can get my frogs, and those frogs are useful for all kinds of like extension apps, the juicing stuff. This another one where you can sort of like put your frog in a lab. There's like more gated chats, right? And I think this is just very, very fascinating and interesting of a way you can sort of engage with an event because you have this technology where everyone has software that can process pods, and they can make proofs, and developers can build applications that interact with these. Okay, so here's where we get a bit more experimental, and if we project this with high uncertainty bars, because no one can know the future, what does this look like? What does this mean beyond just, okay, it's a cool, fun conference experience? Well, I think that if we sort of just literally take each of these boxes and do like the more serious version of it, right? Check-in is basically how customs or traveling across any sort of like high stakes reputation thing where you're going through and you're checking that you are who you say you are. That's essentially what's going on with ticketing, right? And it carries over to the high stakes things like I want to enter a country, or I want to like do something that's highly restricted. Messages, every email has a DKIM signature, and that can be portable on chain, or they can be portable within this sort of cryptographic environment. Voting, that's been said a lot before, so I won't go into it. Faucets, right? What's the sort of bigger version of a faucet, or a bank? It's an actual bank, right? And then I think this direction of apps building on apps is reminiscent of two things. One is like in the early Facebook days, there would just be a ton of like Facebook games, right? I mean, same with Twitter. There was a Twitter API, and there's like all these kinds of like aggregators, or there'd be like, check my Instagram followers, do some sort of like, query over them. I mean, TikTok, there's like the remix behavior where someone can sort of like take a TikTok and like build on top of it, and you get sort of like recursive TikToks, like 6 down. And I think like these kinds of things are really fascinating. I think you see it in DeFi as well, right? But it extends far beyond like derivatives and financial applications. Okay, so this is all cool, but how do we actually get here, right? Because I think like we can all dream and sort of imagine, right? But I think what's important is like what needs to get done. And we have 3 main ideas right now and directions that are, I think, pretty concrete. So the first one is we just need to get better technology, right? There's been a lot that's changed. So Zupass was first launched in 2023. It's built in 6 weeks, which is crazy. There are like all kinds of crazy stories that happen from there. But basically it was built that assuming that, hey, we have what we have at March 2023, and so many things have changed, right? So pods was not even a thing until early this year. And now we have a lot of developments in recursion, which have made so many different kind of things possible. You can basically make proofs of proofs of proofs in sort of arbitrarily long chains of proofs in under 2 seconds on a consumer laptop. And we have not adapted Zupass yet to this new paradigm. And that gives us the ability to also work with data that's not so nicely like ZK friendly. So like ZK email, ZK VMs, they take really long, and they're just not very feasible on phones right now. But that's something we can actually just solve given how much things have progressed over the last year. Yeah, I think we want to continue to improve performance. We have, for example, we've done a lot of open source fixes and feature work with SnarkJS and Semaphore, which are 2 of the libraries we depend on. And a lot of it is because both of these libraries have not really experienced the level of load that before something like Zupass emerged, right? Like, I'll give you one example, which is there's this memory leak issue in SnarkJS that caused people's screens to freeze up, but it only happened when they tried to make really big proofs. And it was a really simple bug that it was allocating too many pages. But my point is like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit because a lot of this stuff has not been tested in production, even though these are sort of like the classic libraries you use. And there's all kinds of like new updates too. There's delegated proving, which seems to be the direction of a lot of the future of client-side stuff. Essentially, where you blind it on the client and you send it to the server to make it succinct. There's new APIs like WebGPU, native proving, which has been exciting, and more of a reason to actually get a mobile app. Right, so things like MoPro and explorations of alternative kind of Zupass or pod clients. For example, there's one experiment we've been doing on Mac native, with a Mac native app, and that allows us to do a lot more like complicated proofs than you can on just your Zupass, which is ultimately bound by the web browser in your phone. Okay, yeah, we need to get more valuable data into this ecosystem as well, right? We can't, frogs are fun, conferences are fun, right? But it can't just sort of stay in our little bubble. We have to really we have to actually go out there and engage with real world data, right? And I think there's passports have been talked about, but there's all kinds of other data that's highly valuable, right? And I think this is where we're kicking off conversations with builders who are working on this sort of like import problem, right? How do you take data that's either cryptographic or not and import it into a format where it can be used in this way, right? TLS Notary and ZK email, I think, are the great examples because there's just so many emails and websites out there. But I think what we want to focus on is how can we sort of take these new imported data and find sort of a use case that makes sense, and then also let devs build further applications on top of this, right? How do we enable the frog crypto of something beyond Devcon or an Ethereum conference, right? That's still an open question that I think will be very interesting to solve. Yeah, I think that's where partnerships with universities, governments, financial service providers, I think this is still, it's starting to get to the point where this makes more sense, right? There's a lot of cool stuff you can do at universities, right? People want to make apps at the Stanfords and the sort of Berkeleys of the world, and they want to make social apps, dating apps, and this is sort of like a great way to get off the ground with a lot of these new technologies. We can sort of work with portability of social media, or Ethereum has been one, but also Farcaster, Blue Sky, X. There's all kinds of directions, and this is not a complete list by any means. Oh, wrong button. Cool. And then last is we want to empower, this is Devcon, we want to empower developers to build the most interesting apps and the most powerful ones. So here's an example of how you can sort of insert a pod to somebody's Zupass in basically 5 lines of code. We try to make these things very simple. We try to make these things very, at the end of the day, we're pragmatic, and we want to ship a lot of things. So I think this has been a really, we spent some time basically in the past few months rushing together an SDK that, so that someone can actually come in and build a Zap without much guidance. We will have a workshop on Friday where we'll go over and just literally build it together. You can build frog battling, frog, dating, or whatever kind of app that comes to mind. Yeah, and crucially, I think no cryptography experience is required, because a lot of what we're doing with these libraries is focusing on how can you just describe the behavior you want, and then we'll take care of the actual implementation. And yeah, there's some documentation, pod.org. It's 6 letters, easy to remember. And we have a Telegram group as well. We haven't shared it too much publicly because we're worried of spam, but I think everyone should join. Everyone should ask our developers with questions, and help us help you guys figure out what to build. Yeah, some upcoming sessions from my colleagues, and then crucially tomorrow we're going to have a full day of programming. There's going to be some cool keynotes in the morning, and then workshops in the afternoon, right? So that workshop with building Zaps with pods at 2:15. And as promised, here is a froggy surprise. I'll just let you guys figure out what's going on, and that's all.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Excited to see what Zaps all you folks build out in the wild. Looks like we got a couple questions. When native mobile app?
Yeah, great question. I think we've probably said soon, like too many times. I think we're really excited for, how fast you can get with native proving. Like Rapid Snark and MoPro have just been, really exciting to see the progress. I think there's a few things. Most of it is honestly just, we're a small team, and we, have to sort of. I think if we had a lot more people, if we had a very strong sort of like, mobile direction, that would be something we'd certainly do. I will say, like, 2025 is a great time to, like, we have already explored a native Mac client. So I would be very surprised if there's no native app next year, but don't quote me on that.
Looks like a question around breaking down parts of the app. Parts of Zupass, like built on primitives like SnarkJS on Semaphore, versus what is driven directly by Zupass?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll separate SnarkJS and Semaphore. So I'll talk about Semaphore first. Semaphore is, at least the latest version, the V4, is essentially a key pair, which is super useful for us. And essentially, a Semaphore identity is a Zupass identity. They're one-to-one. And it's what you use for signing pods. It's what you use for also, like, if pods are soul-bound to you, right, or like watermarked to you, we put your Semaphore public key in that pod to signify that. SnarkJS is used for proving. It's mostly for, if you remember, GPCs. It is, I think, still the fastest web-based library that we've found to be reliable enough, although we're very open to sort of change it. It's crazy because it was built mainly for educational purposes, but now it's being used for like huge use cases. Yeah, and a lot of the rest of Zupass functions similar to a traditional web app. I think the pods being stored locally rather than being stored in a server is a really big difference.
And looks like curiosity around, Zupass building this data wallet. Is there any plans for association with an Ethereum wallet, I'm guessing, and or ZK email like functionality or authentication?
Yeah, we're really excited about, we've been really excited about, I think, all of the sort of ZKX, movements, right? TLS Notary had put in this as well. And I think, like, we finally have the technology to actually do this. It's pretty crazy, but with these things we're terming pod 2, right? We essentially, anything that has a verification function, which is any cryptography really, can be put into Zupass. So I think this is something we're gonna, it's gonna happen, and now we finally have the resources to do it.
Love it. Got some more questions. Sounds like people should show up at the workshop tomorrow. But curious, integrating pods with traditional Web 2 stuff, what that might look like.
So one interesting thing that happens for ProgCrypto is that we created this new data format called a PWT. It's a pod web token. JWT is JSON web token. So pod is essentially a superset of JSON. It can also be serialized to other formats, right? But anyway, as an aside, just to point out like that it's very easy. It's almost like asking, is JSON compatible? It's mostly a serialization format with some opinionatedness around like how do you verify the data. But yeah, these are all like very easily possible because they're cryptographic sources of identity. At least JWTs. I think OAuth, and I'm not familiar with OIDC, but there are ways to import those over to cryptographic data types, for example, with notaries.
One last question I see. Hi, can you go back to the Frog QR code page again, please and thanks.
I mean, I don't think I can.
Unable to do it.
Unable to do that.
It was there, it was gone, because frogs are slippery.
Yes.